Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Hewitt. I'm with the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. I'd like to welcome you to our special episode of the Greening Government webinar series. This is a partnership webinar series that we're doing in conjunction with Alberta Environment and Parks with Government of Alberta. So we're very happy today to host a very timely webinar. So if you've been following climate change, and hopefully if you've dialed into any of our other webinar series, you'll know that this has been a very interesting last year for climate change policy and development in Alberta. We've seen the new government put forward the Alberta Climate Change Leadership Panel, which had a series of recommendations, and we can really expect a whole variety of actions going forward. We've heard some of them announced so far, but it seems that there's still a lot of work to do. However, throughout all of the discussion on climate change to date, it's been pretty clear that municipal governments and governments in general will have a very key role to play going forward. And I think that there's still a good opportunity to really weigh in and show what types of roles that can play out in and the different ways that municipalities can get involved. So on that note, I think today's webinar is an excellent opportunity to look at our closest neighbor who has had some very similar tools with their carbon tax already rolled out now for quite a few years. So it's a great opportunity to learn from some of their successes and some of their feedbacks on how to improve the system. I think that would be really helpful for us at this time as we're figuring out how we want to go forward. So before I introduce our two speakers today, I just wanted a bit of housekeeping to let you know. We'll have about half an hour reserved for questions at the end of the presentation. And hopefully you've seen my chat welcoming everybody, but there's two different ways to ask questions. One, you can either use the Q&A or the webinar chat. And myself as well as the two speakers have access to these. So feel free to ask these questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll do our best to address all of those in the half an hour that follows. So on that note, I would like to introduce first Stephanie Cairns from Sustainable Prosperity. Stephanie has worked with Canada's leading NGOs and think tanks in the field of sustainable development, energy, and climate change for 30 years. She now works with Sustainable Prosperity, a national green economy research and policy institute, where she runs a communities program line with a focus on how to align municipal taxes, fees, and charges to support more sustainable cities. Last fall, and hopefully most of you were aware of this, Stephanie has actually had the privilege of serving on the Alberta government's Climate Change Advisory Panel, and she also sits on the Roundtable on the Environment and the Capital Regional District of Victoria, BC, and on the boards of the Pembina Institute, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and the International Institute for Sustainable Development Experimental Lakes Areas. So joining her today is also going to be a speaker, Cora Hallsworth, with Cora Hallsworth Consulting. Cora operates her own consulting practice based in Victoria, BC, focused on helping her clients advance community and organizational sustainability. She has acted as project director, project manager, facilitator, and advisor for consulting projects for all levels of government, business, and nonprofits. Cora has a long history of working in environmental climate change, energy, and sustainability arena, and has been honored to work on award-winning plans. She worked on some of the first community energy and emissions plans in the country, including the very first integrated energy, climate, and air quality plan for the resort municipality of Whistler. Cora is founder and past president of Connecting Environmental Professionals, a successful nonprofit organization based in Vancouver, and currently serves on the Capital Region's District Roundtable on the Environment in Victoria, providing strategic advice to staff and boards. So without further ado, I will let Stephanie kick us off in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. I really want to thank the Municipal Climate Change Action Center for the opportunity to present to you today. A couple of words first about Sustainable Prosperity in case you're not familiar with us. We're a national think tank, do tank, we call ourselves, based out of the University of Ottawa, but we work across the country. And our focus is specifically on aligning market signals with environmental goals. So trying to bring to bear the full set of economic instruments that will make it easier to achieve environmental goals, and in some cases also more achieve those goals in a more economically efficient manner. We've been very involved over the past number of years in analyzing the effects of the BC carbon tax on the BC economy and trying to assess whether, in fact, the BC carbon tax has had a positive, negative, or neutral effect on the economy of the province. And this analysis has been very high profile. We've been quoted around the world. It's been quite influential in supporting the positive perspective of the BC carbon tax around the world. But it's not the whole story of BC's success in reducing emissions. And even as we've received a lot of profile on the carbon tax analysis, it's always been very much in my mind that there's a comprehensive package of complementary policies, which has also been very significant in the British Columbia experience. And that has been, in fact, critical to supporting the carbon tax and the effectiveness of the price signal. As other provinces have been developing their own climate policies at Sustainable Prosperity, we thought it would be helpful to summarize the set of BC policies aimed at supporting municipal action on climate change. And this is because, as Mark says, we know that municipalities will be critical to many of the more difficult and nuanced consumer side aspects of how energy is consumed and what the emissions profile is, and that the price signal alone is not the best way to approach some of those emissions reductions. And so looking at how the BC package of policies and also the lessons learned to date around what's worked, what's been significant, what has been most important in the BC package of policies, we thought would be a helpful piece of work to bring forward at this time to other provinces. So in fact, Cora has done, we're told this is the first really kind of comprehensive summary of the municipal climate policies in British Columbia. And I'm very pleased to have Cora's expertise brought to bear on this research. She's got extensive experience working with individual municipalities as well as at the policy level. So without further ado, Cora, looking forward to your presentation.
Great, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Mark, as well. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'd first like to start by giving you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And I should mention when before starting that I do have a bit of a cold and I might start to get a bit of a hoarse throat, so I might need to stop for a drink of water in between, but I think it's going to hold up. So first, with our agenda for today's webinar, I'm going to start with an overview of BC's 2008 to 2012 Climate Action Agenda, and this will focus on profiling the tools that were developed to support local government climate action. I'll then highlight some of the key lessons learned, in particular the outcomes, success factors, and challenges associated with the implementation of these tools. And then we'll take questions following the presentation. So there is a dialog box for you to enter questions, and you'll be able to ask verbal questions, as Mark mentioned, at the end as well. So as many of you may know, British Columbia did meet its 2012 interim greenhouse gas emission reduction target of 6% below 2007 levels, in part due to the climate action tools that were rolled out through its 2008 Climate Action Plan, and this included a province-wide carbon tax. So BC has received global praise, as Stephanie mentioned, for the adoption of the carbon tax, but less profile is being given to a series of complementary tools aimed at supporting local government climate action. And this is what we sought to profile in the policy brief that is just being released by Sustainable Prosperity. So the province is now preparing a climate leadership plan to build on the 2008 plan with an anticipated release date of this March. The focus of today's presentation is on the lessons learned during implementation of the 2008 plan and related initiatives. So the tools that we're highlighting today to support local government climate action fall into 4 categories. The first include legislative requirements for local governments. The second include enabling legislation that expand local government's authority with respect to emission reduction measures. The third include tools that provide access to the necessary knowledge and information. And the fourth include targeted funding and incentives. And on this slide, this is a very text-heavy slide, but this is just intended to give you an overview of all the different tools that we will be profiling today during today's presentation. So I'm not going to read each of these out for you, but I'll just pause and actually have a little drink of water while you read through some of these. So one of the most important legislative tools directed at local governments that was introduced as part of BC's climate action agenda was the amendment of the Local Government Act. As a result of this amendment, local governments are now required to include greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, policies, and actions in their regional growth strategies and official community plans. The amendment also provides important enabling tools that enhance local governments' opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with land use planning decisions. So specifically, some of the specific tools that were added on through this act are providing the means to waive parking requirements and development cost charges when actions are incorporated to reduce emissions, and to adopt the use of development permit areas to promote emission-reducing design and building practices. The province is not yet reporting the number of local governments that have included targets in their regional growth strategies and official community plans, but a 2013 study by the University of British Columbia did find that the majority of municipalities they surveyed had included targets in their OCPs. And I've heard estimates that at least 50% of all local governments have now included targets in their OCPs or RGSs, and this number will grow as more of the plans and strategies are updated. In late 2008, the province adopted the Carbon Neutral Government Regulation, and this required all public sector organizations, including core provincial government ministries and agencies, as well as crown corporations, schools, hospitals, and the like, to be carbon neutral by 2012. This regulation, however, does not apply to local government. Instead, the province chose to develop the Climate Action Charter as a voluntary means of engaging local governments in contributing towards meeting this carbon neutral goal. So through the Charter, local governments can sign and commit to the goals listed on the screen here. They include to achieve carbon neutral corporate operations, to measure and report community greenhouse gas emissions, and to create complete, compact, and more energy efficient communities. So, sorry, I didn't mean to advance there. I just wanted to highlight a few of the key results associated with the Charter. As of now, there are 181 of 190 total local government signatories to the Charter, representing about 96% of all the communities. And 40 local governments have now achieved carbon neutral status for their operations. In addition, a study conducted by the Pembina Institute found that the Charter had the most significant impact on influencing the uptake of low carbon initiatives for local government when compared to the other tools that I'm profiling here today. So that is, the local governments they surveyed felt that the Charter influenced their decision-making more than the increased costs associated with carbon taxes, and even more than the provision, and more even than the provision of funding. So on the following slides, I'm going to introduce some of the other tools that were created, in a sense, to support Charter signatories in meeting these commitments. First, we have the Green Communities Committee and the Climate Action Toolkit. So the committee and a number of working groups were established to support Climate Action Charter signatories in meeting their commitments. The working groups and the GCC developed a range of resources and guidelines for use by local governments, and the toolkit serves as a source of best practices, strategic guidance, and additional tools. Next, we have CARIP, the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program. This is a conditional grant for Charter signatories in which they receive grants equal to their carbon tax costs. The province carbon tax was created to be revenue neutral, and as such, the monies collected through the tax were offset by reductions in income tax and corporate tax, and through targeted rebates and grants. Government operations, including those at the local government level, however, did not benefit from any of these tax shifting measures. CARIP therefore provided a means for the province to offset local government's increased costs from the tax. CARIP also served to provide an effective incentive for local governments to join the Climate Action Charter. In 2008, there were 62 signatories to the charter, and after CARIP was announced, this number immediately doubled. And as for an indication of the size of the grant, in 2012, there were $5 million in CARIP grants paid out. The next tool I'd like to profile is the Community Energy and Emissions Inventory, also known as the CEI. So through this inventory, the province collects data from utilities and other entities to compile local emission inventory data. And this is the first inventory of its kind in North America and possibly globally. Inventories, as you know, many of you know, do require a great deal of technical expertise, the establishment of agreements with utilities, and associated resources to prepare them. And this can be a challenge for municipalities, especially smaller ones. With the province taking this work on for local governments, a significant barrier that had previously faced municipalities has been removed. As a result, the CEI has served to quick kickstart community energy planning in the province. And I'll just pause for a drink for a second, just sorry about that. So the province funded a range of programs that directly and indirectly support local government actions to reduce community-wide emissions and emissions from their internal operations. In general, the areas in which the province provided funding and supporting programs are where the most action was taken and where most major gains were made. For example, as a result of funding programs over this period, there are now 975 electric vehicle charging stations installed through the province, and recent news reports indicate that there are now 2,200 clean energy vehicles on the road in BC, and this is up from about 1,000 last year. And I also want to highlight the efforts of BC Hydro, which is a Crown corporation. Their efforts have made significant contributions to energy and emission reduction planning and implementation in the province. In particular, in 2009, BC Hydro launched its Sustainable Communities program. This program is a tool through which BC Hydro is aiming to meet requirements under the Clean Energy Act, mandated by the province to meet 2/3 of future demand growth through conservation by 2020. To date, the program has funded more than 45 community energy and emissions plans. This is nearly half of the plans that were developed between 2010 and 2015. And they've also funded 26 community energy manager positions within local governments. So the policy brief focused on high-level tools that were developed by the province, but there were also a few targeted regulatory tools adopted that have or will have significant impact on greenhouse gas emission reductions in the province. And so I've highlighted a few of these on this slide here. The first is the Solar Hot Water Ready regulation, which is an opt-in tool. 48 municipalities have now signed on to the regulation, and as a result, these communities now require new single-family buildings to be built in a way that would accommodate future solar hot water installation. Next, we have the BC Building Code revisions, which came into force starting late 2013, and these will have the potential to increase energy performance for new buildings by up to 24%. And last on this slide, we have the landfill gas management regulation, which requires landfills generating 1,000 tons or more of methane to install landfill gas management systems by this year, 2016. Some of the governments have already taken early action, and for example, Prince George and Salmon Arm are now avoiding 30,000 tons of emissions per year by meeting the new requirements. So each of these additional supporting tools are having significant impact on reducing local government emissions. So in the previous slides, I've already highlighted a few of the specific results from each of the tools, and the following slides highlight some of the overarching outcomes and key success factors and challenges associated with the tools. And as I mentioned, the tools have profiled the tools I've profiled here have worked synergistically to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the province. One notable outcome has been the dramatic increase in community energy planning in BC, as shown on this graph. You'll see that significant increases in planning occurred in 2010 and 2011, and that by 2015, there were twice as many plans in place in BC as there were in all of the other provinces combined. Funding for community energy plans and community energy managers provided by BC Hydro's Sustainable Communities Program and the province's development of the Community Energy and Emissions Inventory have likely played the largest roles in this increase. There has also been substantial increase in the number of community-wide actions reported to the province, and a steady increase in the reductions in local government's corporate emissions between 2010 and 2013. And as I previously mentioned, 40 local governments have now achieved carbon neutral operations by 2014. A range of factors have contributed to the success of the tools the province adopted to support climate action by local governments. First, it's important to build from existing strengths, capacities, and initiatives, especially those that are already yielding successful results. For example, the growing number of sustainability and energy manager staff at the local government level can be active partners with the provincial government. In BC, these staff in municipalities and regional districts became key collaborators with the province. They co-created tools and initiatives, and they also worked amongst themselves to share ideas and resources. In addition, a provincial climate action plan can build from and enhance existing programs offered by other partners, including, for example, the FCM Partners for Climate Protection program and other programs offered by utilities. In BC, attention was given to ensuring that the policy tools empowered local governments, foster collaboration, and contributed to knowledge sharing, particularly through the creation of working groups and the Climate Action Toolkit. And in some communities, the carbon tax, the charter, and CARIP have been used to build a business case for renewable energy and energy efficiency initiatives. This business case can serve as a tool to engage and gain the support of decision makers and community members at large. These tools have provided a stronger argument for adopting low-carbon projects due to their potential to reduce energy costs in the form of taxes. And for charter signatories, it can serve to reduce the requirement for carbon offsets, and it can provide an opportunity to work towards carbon-neutral commitments and facilitate access to funding. The tools developed to engage local governments in BC's climate action agenda included both mandatory and voluntary elements, with the intention of ensuring a minimal level of participation, but also providing local governments flexibility in forming their own unique action plans. So the mandatory component was the requirement that local governments set greenhouse gas targets, policies, and actions. And the charter itself, however, is designed to be flexible, requiring a commitment, but it does not contain binding targets that have been legislated. Recent studies suggest that BC communities seem to face fewer challenges implementing energy and emissions initiatives than communities in other provinces. This is likely in part a result of the province's provision of regulatory tools such as those provided by the Local Government Act and access to inventory data through the CEI. It's also likely because BC local governments feel supported by the province and were encouraged by the province's clear prioritization of climate action. There have been a number of challenges identified during the rollout and implementation of the tools, some of which will hopefully be addressed in the province's current climate leadership plan, which is currently being developed. The Charter encouraged local governments to commit to carbon neutrality, which has been an easy to communicate call to action. There have been advantages and disadvantages to this approach, however. One potential drawback is that a carbon neutral focus may direct action towards the purchase of offsets rather than on in-house greenhouse gas emission reduction initiatives. In practice, however, it appears the majority of communities have invested in local greenhouse gas emission reduction measures to keep money within their communities. Another downside here, however, is that some of these local initiatives do not qualify as official offsets, as they don't meet international protocols, and therefore local governments investing in these unverified offsets cannot use them towards their carbon neutral goals. That's why there's currently only 40 carbon neutral operations recognized by the province. Currently, there are no stipulations as to how CARIP grants are to be spent. However, these funds could be a significant driver for climate action if there were requirements to use the grants to support a low-carbon transition. A number of communities have already voluntarily taken this approach, and for these communities, the grants provide valuable guaranteed funds for staff and initiatives focused on renewable energy and energy efficiency. As previously noted, some local governments are using the carbon tax, charter, and CARIP to help build business case for low carbon initiatives. However, the delay in updating the 2008 Climate Action Plan has created uncertainty surrounding the carbon tax and the province's commitment to supporting local government action. This uncertainty is weakening the arguments local governments can present to their councils and community members. A commitment to increase the tax over time would therefore strengthen the business case for action. It can be useful to provide local governments flexibility in forming their own unique action plans. However, it is important to acknowledge that there may be limited in-house resources and expertise. In these cases, specific guidance on what to do and how to do it can help accelerate action. For example, by providing specific targets and identifying the actions that would be required to meet those targets. So to conclude, local governments can play a key role in achieving aggressive greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. Canada's local governments have influence over more than half of the greenhouse gas emissions in the country, and a growing number of municipalities have become leaders in climate action. They're the level of government with core responsibility for urban form, and many are becoming the driving force behind low-carbon practices that are transforming public services. It's therefore important for provincial governments to collaborate with, support, and enable action at the local government level in order to achieve provincial climate action objectives. The province of BC's local government tools offer a model for other provinces looking to engage local governments as key partners in delivering on their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and Stephanie and I would be pleased to respond to any of your questions. And I do have one additional slide here with additional information. I believe Mark will be circulating this for you, so you don't need to worry about scribbling these down now, but there's some additional sources of information for you on this slide.
Yep, I can definitely make that information available. Thank you again, Stephanie and Cora. That was a really excellent presentation. So yeah, now we're in question period, and just a quick reminder, there should be a button titled Q&A somewhere either on the bottom or the side, depending on what platform you're using to view the webinar. But just to give you a minute to collect your thoughts and start asking questions, I figured I would ask one of my own. So Cora, I found your discussion of the community energy and emissions inventory really interesting. In Alberta right now, there are no specific province-wide tools available. It's sort of up to each municipality to figure out how to do an inventory and kind of each plan on their own. Hearing that the BC system is quite a bit different from that, I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more about what role the province and the BC Hydro has versus the municipality in helping with these. And as Albertans, where can we go to learn more about this BC setup?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It has been a very central piece, I believe, for increasing energy planning. Definitely, I was involved, as you mentioned in my intro. I was involved in some of the early energy plans done in Canada, and it was definitely a limiting factor for getting additional energy plans. Many of the municipalities didn't have the resources to hire the specialists that are required to do the inventory work, and I was involved in the early stages where the province was exploring how they could do this inventory work on behalf of all the local governments. And so the province did step forward to kind of act as a facilitator of that process, and they engaged the consultancies like the one I was working with at the time, and NGOs as well, so Fraser Basin Council and the Community Energy Association. So they stepped forward and act as a facilitator to help negotiate that, and obviously with BC Hydro and other utilities as well. So it was kind of a collective process with them acting as a facilitator, really spearheaded by a few individuals. So there's they piloted in 2005, and then it was fully launched with 2007 data by 2009. And they're continuing to expand it by adding new indicator data. So they help to provide some indicator data for the municipalities as well, and they're continually trying to expand the functionality and use of the inventory.
Perfect, thanks. And building on that, we actually have a question that asks more specifically, is there an actual community energy plan reporting template that would be available for us to view that is either made for or distributed within BC?
Yeah, so the toolkit on the climate, I'd have to look up the link for you, and I can provide that later, but the Climate Action Toolkit does have a proposed framework and a whole range of different guides for how to get going on energy planning. And the BC Community Energy Association also has lots of resources available on their website as well. So the person asking the question could either Google that or go onto the Climate Action Toolkit and take a look for that, or I could help point them in that direction too, if they can't find it.
If I could add that there has been a quite active community energy association that works with mayors around the province. That's been a bit of an additional capacity support around community energy planning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got another question building on that as well. So as I said, in Alberta right now, we're doing them individually. So each municipality would have to hire a consultant and basically reinvent the wheel. Are you seeing any cost savings from doing all of the inventories together as compared to this sort of one-off individually approach?
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, some of them wouldn't have happened without that inventory work provided by the municipality because the cost was too high. There was estimates done that it would cost at minimum $10,000 to do the inventory work, and that doesn't include any of the subsequent follow-up tracking and redoing the inventory work. So $10,000 on average per municipality. And then so you multiply that across the province. I think it was like a couple of million. I can't actually remember the number that multiplied across. So it's significant. 10,000 is really lowballing that. So, but yeah, significant.
Okay. I've got another question that says, how did you achieve the drastic increase in community energy plans in 2010?
Well, half of the energy plans that were done in 2010 and 2011, so there was 25 done each year, 25 done in 2010 and 25 done in 2011. And a big part of that was the inventory being provided. It was half of those were provided, the funding was provided by BC Hydro through the Sustainable Communities Plan program, I should say. And then also there was the Quick Start program. BC Hydro did Quick Start, and actually those would be included within those ones that I just mentioned that were funded. So the Quick Start program was for smaller communities to help them get going on. There was basically a template provided, and they went in. BC Community Energy Association went into the communities and ran them through a process to help them.
Yeah, and just to add to that the context there being that BC Hydro has a very a pretty challenging target of achieving demand-side management objectives. That's basically requiring them to invest in energy efficiency, investments across the province.
Yeah, two-thirds of future demand growth are supposed to be met through conservation by 2020, and the climate leadership team is actually suggesting that should be. Actually, I'm mixing that up. I'll leave it at that. Two-thirds need to be met through conservation, future demand growth.
Perfect. Okay, so we also have a group message asking if the PowerPoint will be sent out to the group later. So I will check to see if we can share the PowerPoint, and if yes, looks like yes we can. what I'll do is we have a web page for this event on the NCCAC webpage, and so I will post the PowerPoint there, as well as the, assuming I completed all of the recording functions properly, it's my first time doing that, we will be posting this webinar to our NCCAC YouTube page as well, so that you can either review it yourself or share it.
And of course, if you want more depth, there is a policy brief that is the research document behind the PowerPoint as well.
Yeah, we can put a link to that there as well, so everyone can find it nice and easily. The next question I had is, how important was the information and education component to the BC plan?
Well, I would say quite important. Basically, the charter itself acted as a information and education tool. So I think a lot of staff at various local governments around the province were really keen on moving on climate change, but before the charter, they didn't have anything that they could bring. It just provided additional support to help them engage council and community members, showing that the province was behind them and that the province was committing to carbon neutral operations. And a lot of the communities did want to demonstrate leadership and join the province in doing that. And also the Climate Action Toolkit was a central piece of helping share information amongst the different communities. The education that they basically co-created that work together, and it helped them share the best practices amongst themselves. And there was the Live Smart program as well, to help engage individuals in acting on some of these initiatives, retrofits and such. Do you have
when I think of the BC plan, I really like the graphic that Cora did of the jigsaw puzzles that all fit together, because they all need to be connected to the other parts of the plan in order to be effective. The capacity side of what BC's done, I think, has been extremely important in order to give municipalities, particularly small municipalities, the capacity to respond to the price signals and the legislative requirements that were imposed on them. But, you know, in parallel with that, a program that was only about information and capacity wouldn't have had enough incentive behind it for municipalities to take the degree of action that they have. So it's really about an integrated jigsaw of different components of a comprehensive package.
Great. These are excellent questions. So another viewer has asked, as a part of the voluntary sign-up, you mentioned that municipalities could get grants to cover increased costs due to carbon tax. How does the provincial government afford footing the bill for all local government carbon taxes?
Well, essentially the carbon tax is a way of the carbon tax was intended to be revenue neutral. So the province was getting additional money associated with the carbon tax. So there is no additional cost to the province in providing those grants, because the municipalities are paying higher taxes because of the carbon tax. So it's kind of a way of balancing, making sure that the carbon tax was revenue neutral across for the municipalities as well.
Okay. Another viewer question was any of this done with Indigenous communities, and how did that work?
Well, the only thing I can think of in terms of the First Nation communities is the work that BC Hydro has done. They have been quite active in helping remote communities in trying to, for example, getting them off of diesel generators. So the province itself, I can't think of anything coming to me. Nothing's coming to me about a specific program. The carbon tax itself, there were rebates provided for rural communities, and many of the Indigenous First Nation communities would be included within that. So there was rebates provided for them because it was felt that they would be unfairly, the tax would be unfair on them. Stephanie, do you have anything additional to add on that one?
Not specific to Indigenous communities. And also just to clarify that when Cora refers to the rebates for rural and remote communities, they were to individuals in those communities. So they got an additional tax rebate of,
Right.
I think it's about $200 a year, is my memory. But that to compensate for the fact that they, actually, I should be very clear that the perception was that they had additional transportation costs, perhaps additional heating costs because of their northern locations in BC. In fact, it's interesting that the analysis on transportation actually says that people who live in Metro Vancouver spend more on their commuting costs than people who live in rural communities. But there was a very significant political pushback partway through the introduction of the carbon tax from rural communities, and this was one of the responses that was provided.
Great. So I have another question from Michelle, who is asking first to me, Mark, do you know if the government of Alberta is looking at a similar kind of plan for Alberta as discussed the challenges for smaller communities in developing community energy inventories? So I'll take a first stab at this. I can't speak for the government. I do know that they hosted a session to collect some initial feedback while doing the climate change panel on municipalities specifically, and I did get to attend that event, and I did hear this issue raised by a number of municipalities, so they are definitely aware that we're asking for this, and I definitely would continue to support that, but I haven't heard any specifics yet on what tools, if any, will be made available at the Alberta level. Stephanie, as a panelist, maybe you can add and speak to what you heard as well.
Well, we did clearly in our panel recommendations create the space for something similar to this in Alberta. Our recommendation, I'll just read our executive summary recommendation that relates to this, was foster municipal partnerships for climate leadership through changes to the Municipal Government Act, data coordination and capacity building, and increased infrastructure investment to support low carbon infrastructure. So that was very deliberately there to create space for this type of approach in Alberta. I haven't been following the details of implementation in Alberta, so I don't know how that might be implemented, but we certainly created the space for this.
Absolutely, and as MCCAC, if we hear of any progress on this, we will definitely make sure that that information gets out to municipalities across the province.
Yeah, if I can just add, one of the real opportunities I think in Alberta to link two agendas is that because the Municipal Government Act is under active review, there really are opportunities to bring in this climate agenda into that review and introduce some of the flexibility that's been allowed in British Columbia around, certain types of requirements and official plans that might make it easier to build, more green-oriented development, for instance.
Okay. We have another viewer question. It seems that you focused on staff versus council members first. If they're understanding that correctly, why was that approach chosen?
Okay, I seem to be starting to lose my voice now, but I'll try. I got through the presentation though. So I think maybe I was being possibly a little misleading with that, but it does seem, from my opinion, that there was a lot more staff engaged, but there definitely are council members across the province definitely engaged. Ashley, Stephanie, would you mind taking that? Because I am losing my voice a little bit here.
There's really two parts to this. Council members and mayors were clearly engaged through the charter, and the charter was a really key tool to get the political attention of mayors, particularly when it was matched up to this CARIP revenue incentive program. So that's where the political buy-in for carbon neutrality was secured, and then there was a lot of supporting tools at the staff level to do the analysis and the full toolbox to achieve that. But I don't think it was that there was a greater focus on staff. It was that slightly different tools were developed for the different parts of municipal government.
And I think the interesting thing about what happened in BC is over that time period, there was a dramatic growth in the a council or the different communities that adding new sustainability manager positions, director positions, and community energy managers. So there was just a dramatic increase in that, and they really took the bull by the horns on a lot of these initiatives. So I think, yeah, that was a big factor.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, maybe I'll let you start with this next question first. Just given your background knowledge of Alberta, the question is, how can we get a climate action charter started in Alberta?
Okay, I'm laughing a little bit. I think that would be a question for this group to be better positioned to answer. But it seems to me that at the heart of this approach is for the provincial government to see municipalities not as a sector to be regulated, which might be the approach with many other emission sectors in the province, but to see municipalities as actually fundamental partners in delivering on so many parts of what's needed to reduce emissions. So whether it's, changing urban form, whether it's supporting a shift to, different patterns of modality in urban centers, whether it's accelerating energy efficiency in buildings. The province is not able to make a lot of that happen without very strong collaboration and partnerships, and having municipalities be really hand-in-hand equal partners in that approach. So that's the core behind this entire model. And the recognition of that is through the Climate Action Charters. So I think by presenting that approach, and one of the interesting things was that in BC is the scale of sign-on to the charter is virtually every municipality in BC has signed on. So it creates a common expectation and shared buy-in to the expectation across the municipalities. This is a time when it would be great to be able to have a more interactive conversation, but
yeah,
that's my view on it. Yeah. What do you think, Mark?
I think that's a big question. I think what I would really like to see is a more formalized platform for ongoing engagement between municipalities and the province, particularly in this year and the coming years, as Alberta figures out all the different tools and levers they're going to use to enable climate change action. So I think having that kind of forum would be a really useful tool to help answer these tough questions. Okay, I've got another question that asks, was climate resilience considered as part of the municipal action agenda? Are there opportunities to build on the mitigation work to enable similar work on preparedness planning?
That's a great idea. And so it was within the climate action plan, the provincial climate action plan, but in terms of the tools that were laid out, that we've laid out here today, there was no adaptation component specifically included on it. The toolkit, I believe, does have some adaptation work on it, but in terms of what I've presented here today, there is really no adaptation component, and definitely in future work that could be something that could be suggested. It's an interesting idea. Do you have something else to add on that, Stephanie?
No, no, I think it's a great idea. It would be a great platform to build on a similar model of how to support resilience actions.
Yeah, and to have it presented as an integrated package. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we would definitely support that as well. So for those of you who don't know, the MCCAC is in the process of developing a Climate Resilience Express action toolkit with a focus on at least getting smaller municipalities and those who don't have the ability to hire a consultant to do a very long-term project to give them some tools and resources to get started on a quicker version. But I think as a province-wide initiative, we definitely do need to have more engagement on climate change adaptation. Okay, it looks like, at least for now, we haven't had any more questions. So just to give everyone a minute for any last thoughts, I was going to ask one more. Stephanie, as a member of the Alberta Climate Panel, the panel obviously made a very large number of recommendations in the panel report. I'm wondering if you could highlight one or two of the most important actions you think as far as what the province can do to really enable municipalities in Alberta to get more engaged in addressing climate change. Not to put you on the spot.
Yes, well, there were three kind of main parts of our recommendations that were largely clustered in the energy efficiency area of our recommendations. There are three kind of clusters of recommendations that were made that would be relevant for municipalities. One was the pure energy efficiency standards side, which was both around updated building codes and standards, and also energy performance reporting and disclosure requirements. In addition, we heard a lot of interest on integrated energy efficiency and at the and community scale energy generation. So things like community energy systems. Edmonton has a large proposal, for instance, everything from kind of more community scale energy systems to, you know, how do we get more rooftop solar? And some of that stuff was outside of our capacity to make specific recommendations on as a panel, just due to the timelines that we're working on and dealing with the larger electricity system recommendations that we were also dealing with. Really was about as much as we could do on looking at electricity sector reform. But we did highlight this area as a very important area, and one where there seems to be considerable public appetite, municipal interest, and also the opportunity for some very interesting energy efficiency and diversification of the electricity grid system in Alberta. So that's, I think, a very great interest at the municipal level. And then the third cluster of recommendations was very much to what I just described a minute ago, but this kind of integrated approach to supporting capacity at the municipal level for analysis, for community energy planning, for kind of each municipality to really understand its own emissions profile and where its greatest opportunities within its own municipality would be. So there are really three major thrusts of what our recommendations were. We were looking for those to be supported through the energy efficiency investments that we recommended.
Excellent, thank you so much. It's looking like the question stream has stopped, so I think it's probably good to wrap up there. On behalf of the Green in Government webinar series, Stephanie and Cora, I'd really like to thank you for taking the time and speaking to us about all of these excellent lessons that we can consider from our neighbors and figure out how to implement in Alberta. And all the viewers, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned on our MCCAC website for future webinars of this series. We don't have any scheduled at this time, but we're looking at coming out with a new series for some time in spring 2016.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to everyone who joined the webinar. If you've got questions or follow-up, please, our contacts are on the PowerPoint, which will be distributed, and we really welcome them, and best wishes for Alberta's journey down this pathway.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.